26. Kaz. Kaz sped through the upper cells, sparing brief seconds for a glance through each grate. Bo Yul Bayur would not be here, and he didn't have much time. Part of him felt unhinged. He had no cane, his feet were bare, he was in strange clothes, his hands pale and ungloved. He didn't feel like himself at all. No, that wasn't quite true. He felt like the Kaz he'd been in the weeks before Geordi had died. Like a wild animal fighting to survive. Kaz spotted a Shu prisoner lurking at the back of one of the cells. "Sashuya," Kaz whispered, but if the man recognized the code word, he didn't acknowledge it. "Yul Bayur." Nothing. The man started shouting at him in Shu, and Kaz hurried away, past the rest of the cells, then slipped out to the landing and charged down to the next level as fast as he could manage. He knew he was being reckless, selfish, but wasn't that why they called him Dirty Hands? No job too risky, no deed too low. Dirty Hands would see the rough work done. He wasn't sure what was driving him. It was possible Pekka Rollins wasn't here. It was possible he was dead, but Kaz didn't believe it. I'd know. Somehow I'd know. "Your death belongs to me," he whispered. The swim back from the Reaper's barge had been Kaz's rebirth. The child he'd been had died of firepox. The fever had burned away every gentle thing inside him. Survival wasn't nearly as hard as he'd thought, once he left decency behind. The first rule was to find someone smaller and weaker and take what he had. Though, small and weak as Kaz was, that was no easy task. He shuffled up from the harbor, keeping to the alleys, heading toward the neighborhood where the Hertzuns had lived. When he spotted a sweatshop, he waited outside, then waylaid a chubby little schoolboy lagging behind his friends. Kaz knocked him down, emptied his pockets, and took his bag of licorice. "Give me your trousers," he said. "They're too big for you," the boy had cried. Kaz bit him. The boy gave up his trousers. Kaz rolled them in a ball and threw them in the canal, then ran as fast as his weak legs would take him. He didn't want the trousers. He just wanted the boy to wait before he went wailing for help. He knew the schoolboy would huddle in that alley for a long while, weighing the shame of appearing half-dressed in the street, with the need to get home and tell what had happened. Kaz stopped running when he reached the darkest alley he could find in the barrel. He crammed all the licorice into his mouth at once, swallowing it in painful gulps, and promptly vomited it up. He took the money and bought a hot roll of white bread. He was barefoot and filthy. The baker gave him a second roll just to stay away. When he felt a bit stronger, a bit less shaky, he walked to East Stave. He found the dingiest gambling den, one with no sign and just a single lonely barker out front. "I want a job," he said at the door. "Don't have any nub." "I'm good with numbers," the man laughed. "Can you clean a piss pot?" "Yes." "Well, too bad. We already have a boy who cleans the piss pots." Kaz waited all night until he saw a boy about his age leave the premises. He followed him for 2 blocks, then hit him in the head with a rock. He sat down on the boy's legs and pulled off his shoes, then slashed the soles of his feet with a piece of broken bottle. The boy would recover, but he wouldn't be working any time soon. Touching the bare flesh of his ankles had filled Kaz with revulsion. He kept seeing the white bodies of the Reaper's barge, feeling the ripe bloat of Geordi's skin beneath his hands. The next evening, he returned to the den. "I want a job," he said. And he had one. From there, he'd worked and scraped and saved. He'd trailed the professional thieves of the barrel and learned how to pick pockets and how to cut the laces on a lady's purse. He did his first stint in jail, and then a second. He quickly earned a reputation for being willing to take any job a man needed done, and the name Dirty Hands soon followed. He was an unskilled fighter, but a tenacious one. "You have no finesse," a gambler at the Silver Garter once said to him. No technique. Sure I do, Kaz had responded. I practice the art of pull his shirt over his head and punch till you see blood. He still went by Kaz, as he always had, but he stole the name Brecker off a piece of machinery he'd seen on the docks. Reitvelt. His family name was abandoned, cut away like a rotten limb. And it was a country name, his last tie to Geordie and his father and the boy he'd been. But he didn't want Jacob Hertzun to see him coming. He found out that the con Hertzun had run on him and Geordie was a common one. The coffee house and the house on Zelverstraat had been nothing more than stage sets used to fleece fools from the country. Philip with his mechanical dogs had been the roper used to draw Geordie in, while Margit, Saskia, and the clerks at the trade office had all been shills in on the scam. Even one of the bank officers had to have been in on it, passing information to Hertzun about their customers and tipping him off to newcomers from the country opening accounts. Hertzun had probably been running the con on multiple markets at once. Geordie's little fortune wasn't enough to justify such a setup. But the cruelest discovery was Kaz's gift for cards. It might have made him and Geordie rich. Once he learned a game, it took him mere hours to master it, and then he simply couldn't be beaten. He could remember every hand that had been played, each bet that was made. He could keep track of the deal for up to 5 decks, and if there was something he couldn't recall, he made up for it by cheating. He never lost his love for sleight of hand, and he graduated from palming coins to cards, cups, wallets, and watches. A good magician wasn't much different from a proper thief. Before long, he was banned from play in every gambling hall on East Stave. In each place he went, in each bar and flophouse and brothel and squat, he asked after Jacob Hertzun. But if anyone knew the name, they refused to admit it. Then, one day, Kaz was crossing a bridge over East Stave when he saw a man with florid cheeks and tufty sideburns entering a gin shop. He wasn't wearing staid Mercer black any longer, but garish, striped trousers and a maroon paisley vest. His velvet coat was bottle green. Kaz pushed through the crowd, mind buzzing, heart racing, unsure of what he meant to do. But at the door to the shop, a giant bruiser in a bowler hat stopped him with one meaty hand. "Shop's closed. I can see it's open." Kaz's voice sounded wrong to him, reedy, unfamiliar. "You'll have to wait." "I need to see Jacob Hertzun." "Who?" Kaz felt like he was about to climb out of his skin. He pointed through the window. "Jacob fucking Hertzun, I want to talk to him." The bruiser had looked at Kaz as if he were deranged. "Get your head straight, lad," he said. "That ain't no Hertzun. That's Pekka Rollins. Want to get anywhere in the barrel? You best learn his name." Kaz knew Pekka Rollins' name. Everyone did. He'd just never seen the man. At that moment, Rollins turned toward the window. Kaz waited for acknowledgement, a smirk, a sneer, some spark of recognition, but Rollins's eyes passed right over him. One more mark, one more cull. Why would he remember? Kaz had been courted by any number of gangs who liked his way with his fists and the cards. He'd always said no. He'd come to the barrel to find Hertzun and punish him, not to join some makeshift family. But learning that his real target was Pekka Rollins changed everything. That night he lay awake on the floor of the squat he'd holed up in, and thought of what he wanted, of what would finally make things right for Geordie. Pekka Rollins had taken everything from Kaz. If Kaz intended to do the same to Rollins, he would need to become his equal, and then his better. And he couldn't do it alone. He needed a gang, and not just any gang, but one that needed him. The next day, he'd walked into the slat and asked Per Haskell if he could use another soldier. He'd known even then, though. He'd start as a grunt, but the dregs would become his army. Had all of those steps brought him here tonight? To these dark corridors? It was hardly the vengeance he dreamed of. The rows of cells stretched on, infinite, impossible. There was no way he would find Rollins in time. But it was only impossible until it wasn't. Until he sighted that big frame, that florid face through the grate in an iron door. It was only impossible until he was standing in front of Pekka Rollins' cell. He was on his side, sleeping. Someone had given him a bad beating. Kaz watched the rise and fall of his chest. How many times had Kaz seen Pekka since that first glimpse in the gin shop? Never once had there been a flicker of recognition. Kaz wasn't a boy any longer. There was no reason Pekka should be able to see the child he'd swindled in his features. But it made him furious every time their paths had crossed. It wasn't right. Pekka's face, Hertzun's face, was indelible in Kaz's mind, carved there by a jagged blade. Kaz hung back now, feeling the delicate weight of his lockpicks like an insect cradled in his palm. Wasn't this what he wanted? To see Pekka brought low, humiliated, miserable, and hopeless, the best of his crew dead on spikes? Maybe this could be enough. Maybe all he needed now was for Pekka to know exactly who he was, exactly what he'd done. He could stage a little trial of his own, pass sentence, and meet it out, too. The hour clock began to chime, the 3/4 hour. He should go. There wasn't much time left to go to the basement. Nina would be waiting for him. They all would. But he needed this. He fought for this. It wasn't the way he'd imagined, but maybe it made no difference. If Pekka Rollins was put to death by some nameless Fjordan executioner, then none of this would matter. Kaz would have 4 million Kruga, but Jordy would never have his revenge. The lock on the door gave up easily to Kaz's picks. Pekka's eyes opened, and he smiled. He hadn't been sleeping at all. "Hello, Brecker," Rollins said. "Come to gloat?" "Not exactly," Kaz replied. He let the door slam shut behind him.